And joining us right now, live from New York City, is former Secretary of Defense under President Obama and also George W. Bush. Got a brand new book out. Have you heard about this? It's called Duty. Bob Gates, Kansas boy, real pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
You know, we've seen a lot of interviews. A lot of people don't understand what happened to you on the first day of this year.
Well, I wish I could say that it was something adventuresome like backcountry skiing or rugby or something, but the truth is, it's just pure clumsiness. I've tripped on a rug on New Year's Day and cratered.
Just like that.
Well, we are happy to have stumbled upon your book and millions of others as well, certainly causing a bit of controversy. One thing you say, and I read it cover to cover, and there was a lot in there. Quote, you say, never miss a good chance to shut up, one of your favorite expressions. Certainly maybe not taking your advice now, but in reading this, I know that you were incredible at really taking in information before giving your own opinion and making a decision. Why was it important to you now? The book is titled Duty. I'd admit that I would agree maybe you're not the type of person to leave your duty at the door of the White House now. It seems as though there's a calling that you have with this book to write it now and speak up rather than shut up.
First of all, the book's dedicated to the men and women of the U.S. Armed Forces. And so in the first instance, I wrote it for them, their families, and for the America that sent them to war for 10 years to show and humanize the passion and the debates that took place about war policy in both Iraq and Afghanistan, and the war that was going on in Washington while they were fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, and the issues that were being discussed, why certain things that happened the way they did in terms of presidential decisions and so on. The second reason is that in a paralyzed and polarized city where nothing seems to work, I made it work. I managed to cut 36 major defense programs that I thought were overdue, overspent, and so on. I was able to prolong the surge for 18 months, obviously with a lot of help. And then the third reason is that I think there are a lot of, as we look at Syria, we look at Iran, China, Russia. I've worked for 8 presidents, and I think I have a perspective on how to deal with these problems that I brought to those presidents. And because those debates and issues are still before us, I wanted to put my views on the table, the shape of the defense budget and what our military capabilities ought to be, and finally, the impact of a paralyzed and polarized Congress on being able to conduct a coherent national security policy.
Which is important to do it now so the next 3 years.
Yeah, waiting until, I mean, I've been criticized for writing it now, but waiting to write those things in 2017 struck me, it would just make everything irrelevant.
Do you hope that the president and his people that work for him change their ways by putting it in public, enforcing more scrutiny on their practices in order to come to better decisions when it comes to these hard decisions?
Well, I obviously, as apparent from the book, would like to see less micromanagement from the White House. But as much as anything, it is a message to the Congress as well about how damaging their approach and the way they are conducting their business is to the national security of the United States. And people ask me, what's the greatest threat to American national security today? And I say it's encompassed within the 2 square miles that involve the Capitol and the White House.
Meaning the spending and diminishing of military.
Meaning the paralysis, the sequestration of the defense budget, and on and on.
You were talking a little bit about the White House, and we've read and we've quoted you talking about how controlling they were of everything. Also about how from the get-go you realized, wait a minute, everything it seems the administration is doing is focused on re-election. And in your book, you write about how Jim Jones, former commandant for the Marines who wound up as a national security guy, he told you at summit meetings and some other places that White House personnel were advising the president about things they knew nothing about. And in fact, you also write about how some of the senior advisors to the president, like Valerie Jarrett, Robert Gibbs, and David Axelrod, they had a lot more influence over the president than the national security advisor.
Well, what I write about is that that domestic politics was discussed as part of the dialogue on national security issues to an extent that I had not previously experienced.
Do you mean when you say domestic politics, getting reelected?
Well, not just getting reelected, but what's the reaction of the Democratic base going to be? By the way, I also heard this in the Bush administration.
Okay.
But by the time I arrived in the Bush administration, most of the sharp-elbowed political gurus had pretty much disappeared. So I heard a lot less of it, and it was a different time. He was not going to run for reelection and so on. But the point I do make is that although politics was a part of the discussion, I would say the way I've described it is that Obama was aware of the politics, but not driven by them as Biden and Rahm Emanuel were. And on several occasions, including the decision on the Afghan surge, he basically made a decision that went contrary to the advice of all of his political advisors and the vice president.
Right.
To his credit.
Yeah.
The one thing you're unique in, you transferred 2 administrations at 2 critical times, at least 2 wars, conflicts going on. You said on page 322, for the first several months under Obama, it took a lot of discipline to sit there quietly at the table as everyone from the president on down took shots at Bush and his team. Sitting there, I would think to myself, am I invisible? I mean, was you surprised at that? Not only was it uncomfortable, you made a lot of the decisions they were criticizing.
Yeah, well, you know, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Admiral Mike Mullen, and I would ride back and forth together to these meetings at the White House, and we'd look at each other after one of these meetings and say, "So what are we, chopped liver? Do they not realize that the team they were just trashing, that we were integral members of that team at a very senior level?" But, you know, I mean, that's the way Washington works. And as I say in the book, you know, I also had confidence as I sat and listened to that 4 or 8 years later, the next president and his team would be saying the same thing about these guys.
And
Around that same
That's
table.
the way it works.
The vice president's message when he went overseas, the Neanderthals are gone, don't worry, the good guys are here. That had to get under your skin.
Yeah.
I bet you need a cup of coffee in your hand. You say you held a cup of coffee.
As one of the leading Neanderthals.
Your defense method was holding a cup of coffee, right? So that it would prevent you from sort of losing it when things got frustrating.
I'm one of these guys that the angrier I get, the quieter I get.
Oh, really?
Right.
Okay, so
If
let's
that
see how
happens to
quiet
us,
you
we
get.
do lose ratings.
Yeah.
I want to hear something. This is Harry Reid claiming that the war was lost in the surge, and we'll see how quiet you get after hearing this.
I believe, myself, that the Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, and you have to make your own decision as to what the President knows, that this war is lost and that the surge is not accomplishing anything.
Your thoughts?
I was enraged when I heard that. I mean, for a senior political leader in the Congress, in essence, to tell all those American kids out there that they were putting their lives on the line for nothing, I just felt was incredibly irresponsible. And so in the book, I follow that with a quote from Lincoln. I don't know if you have it right there, but Lincoln had some pretty strong words for members of Congress who try to affect troop morale and so on.
I'll get it when we come back.
All right. Can you stick around for one more segment?
Sure.
Good, because it's in the teleprompter. Coming up, our lightning round with Secretary Gates. He's sizing up some of the Obama administration's past and present members. You don't want to miss that. Live from New York.
There was a long pause
There
before you
was.
said yes.